I married Raymond because he was the son of my former boss. 4 years ago, we tied the knot. Although we haven't started a family yet, our life together has generally been happy. Raymond is dedicated to his work and often travels, which can leave me feeling lonely, but he makes up for it by spending quality time with me when he's home. I first met Raymond through my father, and it wasn't long before he suggested I become a stay-at-home wife. This arrangement gave me the time to pursue my own interests. I took up sewing and knitting, befriended our neighbors, and even started a fitness routine. Every winter, I'd gift Raymond handmade scarves and gloves. At first, my attempts were a bit amateurish, but his appreciative comments over the years encouraged me, and I grew to love crafting even more. I'd often dream of the day when we could settle together as a family. I once shared this thought with Raymond, and he smiled warmly, entertaining the idea of joining me in the future. To outsiders, our life may seem privileged thanks to Raymond's substantial income, but I never skimped on supporting him, managing the household, and making the most of our time together on his days off. I imagined a quiet, content future with my kind husband and, hopefully, children. However, 3 years ago, everything changed. One evening, while waiting for Raymond to return home from work, I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed. Raymond rushed back and took me to the hospital. As I lay recovering, vulnerable, it was then, to my shock, that Raymond confessed with a smile. "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter." Seeing the scarves and gloves I had made for him discarded and devalued, I was struck with a need to confront him. I wanted him to realize how wrong he was if he thought he could belittle my worth. Despite the hurt, the thought of him eventually recognizing my value brought a small smile to my face. I am Ashley Carroll, and this revelation was a harsh wake-up call about the marriage I had once believed was built on love. When I woke up in the hospital, I overheard snippets of Raymond's conversation with the doctors. It became clear that my condition was serious, likely a lifelong issue. Though not immediately life-threatening, still, the risk of recurrence meant I would need to stay in the hospital for some time. Raymond tried to reassure me during one of his visits, holding my hand gently. "It looks like you'll be here for a while, but don't worry, I'll make time to visit, and we'll get through this together." His presence eased my anxiety, and for a moment, I felt that everything might be okay with him by my side. True to his word, Raymond visited almost every day. He asked about my day and, noticing the monotony of hospital life, even brought my favorite sewing tools so we could pass the time together. Teaching my clumsy husband to sew became one of the highlights of my days. It helped me momentarily forget the dreariness of the hospital and feel connected to him. This routine continued for about a year, and I knitted a scarf for him as part of our yearly tradition. But after that, his visits grew less frequent. At first, I thought it was just work piling up, so I kept myself busy with sewing, planning to give him a pair of gloves I was making when he visited next. The doctors told me I'd likely be discharged by the end of the year, and I poured all my energy into crafting the gloves, hoping they would bridge the gap created by our time apart. However, when Raymond finally visited after a long absence, his reaction was chilling. He glanced at the gloves I offered and said, "Are you still making these? It's honestly a nuisance now." He then handed me the scarf I had knitted for him the previous year, untouched and pristine, along with divorce papers. Stunned, I could only stare as the reality of the situation sank in. The scarf was as new as the day I had given it to him, and his cold words marked the painful end of a marriage I had once believed was supportive. "Has it been 3 years since your hospitalization?" he remarked casually. "I heard you'll be discharged soon." His indifference was like a sharp blade, cutting through everything I had cherished. "I can't keep taking care of you," Raymond said bluntly, pushing the divorce papers toward me. I stared at them, the weight of his words sinking in. His signature was already on the documents, a clear sign of his resolve. I had suspected this might happen. especially after his visits became less frequent. But I had told myself it was just the stress of work, trying to dismiss my fears. The caring Raymond I had known would have kept me informed, no matter how busy he was. As he stood there waiting for my reaction, I managed to ask calmly, "Why do you want a divorce?" It wasn't desperation to hold on to him that prompted the question, but a resigned acceptance. If the gentle Raymond I loved thought divorce was necessary, maybe he was right. Still, part of me was confused. He had promised we would face this challenge together. Raymond's response was harsh and dismissive. "Isn't it obvious? Ever since I married you, all we've had are troubles." I was exhausted, tired of the scarves and gloves you gave me every year. "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter," he sneered, his words cutting deep. "How can I be expected to deal with your illness on top of everything else?" He laughed, the sound mocking, dismissing my affectionate gestures as trivial and my illness as nothing more than an inconvenience. As his words sank in, I noticed the high-end scarf he was wearing, one I didn't recognize. Certainly not one I had made. It was sleek, expensive, far beyond anything I had ever crafted for him. The realization hit me hard. He had never valued any of the scarves or gloves I had poured my love into. In fact, he may have found them irritating from the start. "Who can wear a handmade scarf without feeling embarrassed these days?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Receiving such gifts had apparently been nothing but an annoyance. A wave of sadness washed over me. But strangely, there was also a sense of relief. The sadness stemmed from the painful truth: the man I had once loved had changed so completely. The relief, however, came from the clarity. At least I finally knew the truth, even if it stung. Looking at the divorce papers in front of me, I couldn't help but reflect on the turning point in our relationship. My hospitalization had changed everything, but I hadn't understood how deeply it had affected us until now. After my father retired, Raymond no longer needed to keep up appearances with me. All those visits he had made between work commitments, they now seemed like part of a carefully crafted act to maintain his image. His co-workers must have seen him as the devoted husband, balancing a career and a sick wife, earning sympathy and praise, making it easier for him at work. And he had used my condition to his advantage. When I confronted him, he admitted it, without remorse. If I stayed late, I was diligent. If I needed a break, I just mentioned my sick wife. It made things easier, honestly. I even got a promotion thanks to you. I have to thank your illness for that. His cold grin made my heart sink. The man I had married was nowhere to be found. Our conversation ended with me signing the divorce papers. He barely glanced at them before saying, "Well, if I can be of help, that's good. We probably won't see each other again. Take care." And just like that, he left, showing no emotion. The divorce was a quiet affair, but in the silence that followed, I cried. After being discharged from the hospital, I moved back in with my parents. My father was furious when he learned the full extent of Raymond's behavior. "I never thought he would be that kind of guy," he muttered in disbelief. But by then, I had found a sense of calm detachment. I reassured him, telling him I just wanted to move forward. As I sorted through my things at the house I had shared with Raymond, my parents supported me, encouraging me to do whatever made me happy. I decided to live with them for the time being, but I wanted one last visit to the house to collect the rest of my things and close that chapter of my life once and for all. However, when I arrived, I was met with an unsettling surprise. The front door lock was broken. My parents and I rang the doorbell, only to be greeted by a stranger. When I asked who he was, he informed me that he had purchased the house months ago and was now living there with his family. My parents were furious, but I chose not to escalate things. Instead, I walked away quietly, my mind racing with questions. I called Raymond, desperate for answers. He answered casually, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital." I'm keeping the money as compensation. It was my house to begin with. So you have no complaints, right? His indifferent tone stunned me, a cold sense of disbelief washing over me. I wish he had told me sooner. From what the new owner shared, it seemed the house had been sold a year ago, around the time Raymond's visits had stopped. Though our divorce had been finalized, we had agreed to discuss asset division and compensation after my discharge, planning to meet the following week. Yet Raymond had already taken matters into his own hands. His lack of awareness bothered me more than I had expected. Over the phone, I said, "You don't understand anything, do you?" He responded with a confused, "Huh? What do you mean?" I replied, "I'll explain next week," and hung up, leaving him with more questions than answers. I turned to my parents, who were clearly worried, and asked my father for a favor. Despite the short notice, he quickly prepared the necessary documents for our upcoming meeting. "I've got it all ready," he said with determination. "There's not much time, but we'll manage." His resolve was partly fueled by guilt. He had introduced me to Raymond, and his anger toward him for what had transpired. We sat together at my family's home, with my parents and I positioned in a line facing Raymond, who sat alone on the other side. Despite the tension, he appeared unconcerned, even smirking slightly as the conversation unfolded. He claimed, "I'm the victim here, but I don't intend to demand too much. The proceeds from the sale of the house will suffice." His words were laced with arrogance, as though he were being generous, but his smugness was clear. My father's face, ridden with anger, was hard to ignore. I placed a hand on him, urging him to stay calm. We had the upper hand in this situation, and I knew it. "There's something important we need to discuss first," I began. At that moment, my father presented a document. "The land on which the house stands is owned by me," my father said firmly. I turned to Raymond. "The house was in your name, I acknowledge, but the land belongs to my father." The revelation hit him hard, though he tried to mask his surprise with a dismissive tone. His eyes betrayed him. "So what? The house was mine. No one has the right to complain. You think you can retaliate with that?" I remained calm. "Yes, the house was in your name, and you probably checked that there were no legal issues with selling it. But let me explain the broader implications." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in. "You're right. There was no problem with you selling the house. But think about the family who bought it. They own the house, but not the land. If my father decides to, he could demand rent from them, which would cause serious issues." I allowed that to sink in for a moment before continuing. "Of course, neither my father nor I intend to do that, but we wanted you to understand the consequences. I didn't intend to demand rent or evict them, but we couldn't simply relinquish the land either. We proposed selling the land directly to the family, ensuring they could have full ownership. This way, they wouldn't face future legal disputes, and neither would Raymond." Understandably, the new owners were upset when they learned of the situation. They realized that any complications stemming from this oversight would fall on Raymond. They were ready to take legal action if necessary, visibly unsettling him. I watched as his face drained of color, the weight of the mess he had created sinking in. Raymond, finally aware of the severity of his mistake, stammered, "What should I do?" I remained calm, offering the best solution for the family to purchase the land from us, resolving any legal ambiguities. I added that, though they hadn't known they needed to buy the land when they bought the house, they would likely seek compensation for this unexpected expense. Given the prime location of the land, it could cost more than the house itself. This left Raymond in a difficult, financially precarious position. By selling the house without considering the land, he had created a complex issue not only for himself but also for the unsuspecting family who had purchased it. Now, he faced the possibility of compensating the new owners for the land, an expense he hadn't foreseen. Raymond had few options left. If he gave up all his assets, he would be left with nothing. Alternatively, he could attempt to buy back the house and pay for the land, along with a relocation fee for the family currently living there. This would return the property to his possession, but given the significant costs, especially the relocation fee, it was unlikely he'd make any profit. Beyond the financial mess, there was the issue of the emotional damage he had caused me. I looked him in the eye and said, "Raymond, your actions have caused me significant mental distress. I plan to seek compensation for that." Throughout our marriage, Raymond had used me as a stepping stone for his career. Now that I could see his manipulations clearly, I was disgusted by what I had once mistaken for love. I intended to file for damages for the emotional toll his actions had taken, knowing that proving emotional distress in court could be challenging, but raising the issue was important, especially given his current predicament. As Raymond processed this, my father added fuel to the fire. Though retired, he had maintained strong connections at his former company. "I've been in touch with my old colleagues," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "They've been quite vocal about their disapproval of how you've treated my daughter." My father's words were a reminder of how Raymond's reputation was deteriorating. His unethical behavior was no longer a secret. We sat across from Raymond, preparing to discuss the terms of property division and compensation. I remained calm but firm. "Now that you understand the situation, we need to settle the division of property and compensation," I said, clasping my hands and offering a smile. It was a smile that was nothing like the ones I had given him during our marriage. This one came from someone who had reclaimed her power. Raymond, visibly shaken by the weight of his financial and social collapse, could only manage a forced laugh. His eyes brimmed with tears. The negotiations that followed were decidedly in my favor. Resigned to his fate, Raymond agreed to the terms, which included paying me alimony. This meeting wasn't just about dividing property. It was a moment of realization for Raymond, a stark reminder of the consequences of his actions. It marked the end of his manipulative tactics. With every decision made, I felt a sense of closure and empowerment, finally turning the page on a challenging chapter of my life. We agreed that Raymond would buy the land beneath our house, ensuring the family who had purchased it could live there without further legal complications. We explained the situation to them, and thankfully, they were understanding and appreciative of our efforts to resolve the matter. In the end, everyone found a resolution that worked for them, except for Raymond. The consequences of his actions unfolded quickly. The rumors my father had unintentionally set in motion took their toll. Raymond's colleagues began to view him differently, and his once promising promotion was indefinitely postponed due to concerns about his integrity. These rumors continued to erode his professional standing, ultimately leading to his resignation. While I could attribute his downfall to karma, it served as a stark reminder that gains made through exploitation are fragile and can easily crumble. As for me, I returned to living with my parents and started running a sewing class from their home. It wasn't a thriving business, but it was fulfilling. My classes, attended by neighborhood wives and their children, provided a modest income, though I had once dreamed of teaching my own children to sew. Life had taken a different turn. Now, I found joy in sharing my skills and passion for sewing with others in the community. This new chapter of my life wasn't just about making ends meet, it was about finding contentment and building a sense of community by sharing what I loved. It confirmed that happiness often comes from the most unexpected places.